She was given to the ruthless Alpha King as punishment. He made her his everything. The rain fell in relentless sheets across the kingdom of Dravenger, turning the cobbled streets into rivers of glistening gray. Lightning cracked across the storm-dark sky, revealing the jagged silhouette of the castle atop the cliffs. It loomed over the land like a silent predator, its towers disappearing into the swirling clouds. Inside, in the throne room where shadows clung to stone like ivy, the air was heavy with expectation. Alara's hands trembled as she knelt before the guards at the castle gates. Her noble dress, once bright and proud, was damp and torn from the journey. Her heart pounded not only from exhaustion but from fear. She had been sent here as punishment, not for a crime she had committed, but for one she had not. Her family had betrayed her to save themselves, offering her to the Alpha King of Dravenger, Valerius, a man whispered about with equal parts reverence and terror. They said he was ruthless, that no one dared look into his eyes for too long, that he ruled not only with power but with an instinctive understanding of fear. And now she was at his mercy. The massive doors creaked open. Two guards stepped aside, revealing the throne room in all its grandeur. Candles flickered along the walls, and the polished floors reflected their wavering light like a river of gold. At the far end of the room sat Valerius, his posture regal and commanding, though his face remained partially hidden in shadow. Even from a distance, Alara felt a chill as if the air itself had grown heavier. Valerius rose from his throne without a word. His dark eyes swept across her, sharp and assessing. The storm outside seemed to echo in the tense silence between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. "You are Alara of House Linther," he said, each syllable measured. "Your family has chosen to save themselves by offering you as punishment." Alara swallowed, her throat dry. She had rehearsed what she would say, but no words came. Valerius continued, stepping closer, his long cloak brushing the floor. "Do you understand why you are here?" "Yes, my lord," she whispered, though her voice felt small even to her own ears. Valerius's gaze did not soften. "You will remain in this castle. You will obey its rules. You will do as I command. And if you fail," he let the words hang in the air like a blade, "you will discover why fear has always ruled this land." Alara nodded, feeling the icy grip of despair. She wanted to resist, to shout, to demand justice, but she had no allies here, and the castle walls were as unforgiving as the king himself. A servant led her to a small chamber, dimly lit by a single lantern. The room was sparsely furnished, a wooden bed, a small table, and a chair. She dropped onto the bed, exhaustion crashing over her. Her thoughts swirled with images of her family, faces twisted in fear and relief, and of the king, whose presence felt both terrifying and magnetic. For hours, Alara sat by the window, watching the storm rage across the cliffs. Every flash of lightning seemed to reveal the castle's hidden corners, where secrets waited in shadow. She wondered if she could survive in this place. And yet beneath her fear, a small spark of defiance burned. She would not be broken so easily. The next morning she was summoned to the throne room. Valerius sat again, as still and imposing as a mountain. He studied her as if measuring not only her obedience but her spirit. "You are not like the others," he said finally, his voice low. "You do not tremble as they do. That is interesting." Alara's heart skipped. There was something in his tone that she could not read: curiosity, amusement, something darker. "I will not cause trouble, my lord," she said carefully. "Words are easy," he replied. "Actions reveal truth." He gestured for her to follow. She obeyed, moving through the castle's winding corridors. The halls were lined with suits of armor, their metal polished to a reflective sheen, and tapestries depicting battles long past. Each step echoed, reminding her that every corner of this place belonged to Valerius. They entered a private courtyard, illuminated by the early morning light filtering through clouds. The storm had passed, leaving the stones slick and glistening. Valerius stopped and turned to her. "You will learn quickly," he said, his dark eyes fixed on her. "This castle has rules. You break them, and you will feel consequences beyond what your mind can imagine. But if you survive, perhaps you will earn something greater." Alara felt a flicker of hope, though she did not yet understand what he meant. She nodded, trying to steady her voice. "What is this something greater?" she asked, curiosity edging her fear. Valerius did not answer directly. Instead, he handed her a small, ornate key. "First, learn obedience. Then perhaps you will learn more." Days passed, and Alara began to understand the rhythm of life in the castle. Valerius's presence was everywhere, felt in the guards' watchful eyes, in the whispers of servants, in the very stones themselves. She learned to move carefully, to speak sparingly, and to observe. Yet even as she adapted, she noticed moments that revealed the king's complexity. A servant who faltered before him was punished harshly, yet when Alara herself showed cleverness in a task, he allowed it, his dark eyes lingering on her with what felt like consideration. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, Valerius summoned her to the courtyard again. This time, he spoke of strategy, of the kingdom's defenses, and even of matters she had never been taught. He questioned her mind, her judgment, her courage. And with each test, Alara realized that survival in this place required more than obedience. It required understanding, strength, and the ability to read the man who ruled over everything. "Do you understand why I test you?" Valerius asked, stopping before her. The wind tugged at his cloak, making him seem larger, more untouchable. "Yes, my lord," Alara said, but inside her mind raced. She did not yet know whether these tests were meant to prepare her or to punish her. Valerius's gaze softened ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, before returning to its usual intensity. "Very well, rest now. Tomorrow we continue." That night Alara lay awake, listening to the wind whip through the castle towers. She thought of her family, of the betrayal that had brought her here, and of the king himself, terrifying, commanding, and yet fascinating. A sudden noise startled her. A shadow moved across the room. She sat up, heart hammering. "You wonder if you will survive me," a low voice said from the doorway. She froze. Valerius stood there, framed by the moonlight. His presence filled the room, overwhelming and commanding. "You do not yet know the rules of this place," he continued, "but you will, and when you do, you may find that survival is only the beginning." Alara swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "I will obey, my lord." Valerius's eyes seemed to soften, though the intensity remained. "Obedience is not enough. You must endure, and you must endure yourself." He turned and left, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alara's heart raced. She understood in that moment that her life had changed forever. She was no longer merely a noblewoman. She was a pawn, a student, a survivor, and perhaps, in some unfathomable way, something more. The storm outside had faded, but the storm within the castle and within her was only beginning. She could feel it in every shadow, in every whispered secret, and in the pull of the man who had taken control of her fate. Alara closed her eyes and whispered into the silence, "I will not break. I will survive no matter what." And in the darkness, it almost felt as if the castle itself listened, waiting for the truth of her words to unfold. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of Drevengr Castle, casting long beams across the polished stone floors. Alara stood in the courtyard, her hands clasped tightly before her. She had learned quickly that in this castle, every gesture, every glance, every word mattered. A careless action could earn punishment, or worse, draw the king's cold disapproval. Valerius had not spoken much since their last encounter, yet his presence lingered in every corner. The castle seemed to breathe with his authority, the shadows moving as if in silent acknowledgement of his power. And yet within that power, Alara began to notice subtle shifts, moments of hesitation, a softening of his voice, fleeting expressions that betrayed curiosity rather than cruelty. She had to understand him. Survival alone was no longer enough. If she was to endure, she needed to learn the unspoken rules of this world. Valerius appeared at the far end of the courtyard, his cloak flowing like a shadow behind him. He moved with the confidence of a man who ruled not just a kingdom but every person within it. His eyes, dark and piercing, fixed on her immediately. "Today, you will accompany me," he said, his voice smooth but carrying the weight of command. "You will observe and you will remember." Alara's pulse quickened. She had no idea where they would go or what he expected of her. She nodded and fell into step beside him. They walked through corridors lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and coronations. Servants hurried past them, heads bowed, and the castle's great halls echoed with the sound of their footsteps. Valerius did not speak, yet his eyes scanned her, measuring every subtle reaction: the tightening of her grip on her cloak, the quickening of her breath, the flicker of determination in her gaze. They entered a smaller hall where maps and scrolls were spread across a long table. Valerius gestured for her to approach. "Tell me," he said, his dark eyes studying her, "what would you do if the northern borders were under threat? The enemy moves swiftly, and the villages are unprotected. You have only your wits and the resources you see here." Alara took a deep breath, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy and demanding, yet not cruel. He was testing her, not just her intelligence, but her ability to remain calm under pressure. "I would send scouts first," she began, pointing to the northern territories on the map. "Then I would strengthen the village defenses with any available troops, and I would ensure the villagers are prepared to defend themselves. If the enemy is too strong, I would lure them into a trap near the cliffs. The terrain favors us if we act carefully." Valerius leaned back slightly, a shadow of approval in his expression. "Good, you think like a strategist. Few do." Alara felt a small thrill of pride. She realized that in this world, cleverness was a form of protection. Obedience alone was not enough. She needed to think, to anticipate, to act. Over the following days, Valerius continued to test her. Some tasks were simple, designed to teach her patience and observation. Others were more complex, challenging her to navigate the intricacies of the castle and the court. With each test, she began to see the king's patterns, his sharp mind, his sense of justice, and the way he rewarded insight over fear. One evening, he summoned her to the garden, where the moonlight glimmered on the dewy grass and fountains reflected the stars. The air was cool, scented with night-blooming flowers. Alara felt a strange calm here, as if the world outside the castle no longer existed. "You have learned quickly," Valerius said, standing beside her. His shadow stretched long across the garden, his figure both commanding and solitary. "But speed is not enough. Patience, observation, and understanding are what will keep you alive here." Alara nodded, her heart beating faster than usual. There was an intensity in his eyes, a quiet force that both unsettled and fascinated her. "Why do you test me?" she asked softly, unsure if she dared to speak. Valerius did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the horizon, where the castle cliffs met the dark forest beyond. The wind caught his cloak, making him appear taller, more untouchable. "Because strength without understanding is useless," he finally said. "Because knowledge without caution is dangerous. And because you intrigue me." The last words hung in the air, charged and unspoken, carrying a weight that made Alara's chest tighten. Intrigue. She had been cautious, obedient, clever, but to be noticed by Valerius in this way was disorienting. That night Alara could not sleep. She paced her chamber, thinking about the king's words, replaying the tests and their conversations. Fear still lingered, but beneath it, a new emotion stirred: curiosity, fascination, and a hint of something she could not yet name. The days turned into weeks, and their interactions deepened. Alara noticed small signs of the man behind the mask of ruthlessness. He would linger near a servant who faltered in duty, not with cruelty, but with a measured correction. He listened to the advice of his generals, considering their words carefully before acting. And in moments when he believed no one was watching, he showed fleeting glimpses of vulnerability, an ache in his eyes, a sigh that hinted at burdens he carried alone. Alara began to understand that survival in this castle required more than wit. It required empathy, insight, and a careful balance of courage and restraint. And she also began to understand something more dangerous, her own fascination with the man who ruled this kingdom with both fear and quiet justice. One night, as she walked the corridors, she heard voices in the shadows. Two guards spoke in hushed tones about a potential threat to the king, a betrayal from within the castle walls. Her heart quickened. The knowledge was dangerous, but withholding it could be fatal. She debated whether to speak immediately or observe further. Valerius found her in the moonlit corridor. His presence was sudden and commanding. "You have heard something," he stated, not asked. Alara swallowed, keeping her voice steady. "I heard whispers. I thought it best to wait before speaking." He stepped closer, his eyes piercing into hers, searching, analyzing. "Wisely done. Patience is as valuable as courage." For the first time, she felt a moment of connection with him, not fear but recognition. He respected insight, as dangerous as it might be. "You will learn, Alara," he said quietly, "that this castle tests not only strength but the spirit. Many fail because they cannot see what lies beneath the surface." Alara nodded, a sense of determination filling her. She would not fail. She could not fail. Survival was no longer enough. She wanted to understand this man, to match his intellect, to navigate the dangerous world he ruled. Days later, they were in the library, surrounded by ancient tomes and manuscripts. Valerius had tasked her with organizing intelligence reports and analyzing threats to the kingdom. The work was tedious but revealing, and Alara found herself growing more confident. "Do you see?" Valerius asked, standing behind her. "The kingdom is more than walls and armies. It is knowledge, foresight, and patience. Those who ignore this fall." "I understand, my lord," she replied, though her mind was already racing ahead, thinking of ways to anticipate dangers, to protect herself, and perhaps to influence the man who had become both her captor and her enigma. The air between them grew heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. They were no longer simply king and prisoner. They were two minds circling each other, testing boundaries, seeking understanding. Their connection was subtle, intricate, a dance of intellect, emotion, and the faintest hint of desire. One evening in the garden again, Valerius turned to her. "You have learned quickly, but remember, knowledge can be dangerous and insight can be deadly. Do not mistake fascination for trust." Alara's breath caught. "I do not, my lord," she whispered, though she could not deny the pull she felt toward him. Valerius studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Then perhaps you will survive the next test. And perhaps you will begin to understand me." As he walked away, the wind tugged at his cloak, and Alara watched him disappear into the shadows of the castle. She knew then that the path ahead would not be simple. She would face danger, intrigue, and perhaps even the complexities of a heart caught between fear and fascination. Yet she also knew something else. She would endure. She would learn. And somehow she would survive, whatever the cost. The castle of Drevengr was quieter than usual, but the silence carried a weight that pressed against the walls like fog. Alara walked through the corridors, her steps echoing softly. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the castle, the footsteps of the guards, the whisper of servants, the distant clanging of armor, but tonight felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something unseen was stirring. Her thoughts returned to Valerius, the man who had seemed untouchable, a shadow over the entire kingdom, had begun to feel less like a tyrant and more like a mystery she could not resist unraveling. Every glance, every word, every silent moment had drawn her in deeper. And yet the danger surrounding him, and the secrets of this castle reminded her that fascination was as perilous as rebellion. Alara reached the library, a vast hall lined with towering shelves of ancient tomes. Valerius was already there, standing over a large map spread across a table. His cloak fell around him like midnight, his posture unyielding. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You are punctual," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "Good, that is useful." Alara's fingers brushed over the edge of the table as she stepped closer. "I want to understand everything, my lord. The castle, the kingdom, the threats we face." Valerius's dark eyes studied her for a long moment. "Knowledge is dangerous," he said finally, "especially when it comes with choices. The more you learn, the more you are responsible. You cannot unsee what you know." Alara nodded. She had begun to see the truth of his words. In this place, ignorance was safety, but knowledge, true understanding, was power, and with power came danger. "Tonight," he said, "I will show you part of the past. You need to understand me if you hope to survive this castle." He led her through winding corridors to a smaller, hidden chamber she had never noticed before. The walls were lined with mirrors, their surfaces old and dim, reflecting shadows like memories trapped in glass. Candles flickered, casting trembling light across the room. "This room," Valerius said, gesturing to the mirrors, "reveals what we try to hide not from others but from ourselves." Alara's heart raced. She had seen the king as a figure of control, strength, and fear, but she had not yet glimpsed the man beneath, the boy, the son, the betrayed soul. "You were betrayed," she said softly, though she did not know why the words left her lips. Valerius stiffened, his hand brushing against the map on the table. "A betrayal can shape a man more than love ever could," he murmured. "It teaches caution, vigilance, and sometimes cruelty. I learned long ago that trusting the wrong person can cost everything." Alara stepped closer. "I understand, my lord. I was betrayed too, by my own family." The words hung in the air. Valerius looked at her differently now, not as a pawn or a prisoner, but as someone who had also suffered, someone who might understand the weight of choices and pain. "You are stronger than you realize," he said. "Many would have crumbled under such deceit, yet here you are." Alara felt a strange warmth in her chest, mingling with the fear that always accompanied him. There was a connection forming, fragile and dangerous, between two people who had learned to hide their hearts behind walls of steel and shadows. For the next several days, Alara continued her lessons and tasks with renewed focus. She studied the castle's maps, the kingdom's reports, and the subtle cues that revealed allies and enemies alike. And all the while, Valerius observed her, not always with words, sometimes with just a look that seemed to weigh her soul. One night, as the moonlight streamed through the tall windows of her chamber, Alara was startled by a noise, a soft scuffle, a whisper of movement. She followed it to the corridor, where she saw two figures huddled in conversation. She recognized the insignias of certain nobles, those whose loyalty was questionable. Her heart pounded. She realized they were plotting something against Valerius. Her mind raced. Should she confront them? Should she inform the king immediately, or wait and gather more information? Every choice carried risk, and every hesitation could mean death. Before she could decide, Valerius appeared from the shadows. His presence was immediate, commanding, and silent. "You found them," he said simply, his gaze piercing. "Yes," Alara replied, keeping her voice steady. "They were plotting against you." Valerius's eyes darkened, but not with anger, rather with focus and calculation. "Good, you have courage and insight. But courage without caution can be fatal. Do you understand?" "I do, my lord," she said, her pulse racing. "Then we act carefully," he said. "Follow me." Together they moved silently through the castle, their shadows merging with the walls. Valerius's presence was overwhelming, yet Alara felt a strange sense of security walking beside him. They confronted the conspirators quietly, exposing the plot without alerting the rest of the court. The nobles were taken, their power broken, and the castle's order was restored. Afterward, Valerius led her to the garden. The night was calm, the moon reflecting on the fountains, and the air carried a faint scent of jasmine. "You did well," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You acted with intelligence and courage. Few would have managed it without alerting others or endangering themselves." Alara felt a flush of pride, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "I only did what I thought was right," she said. Valerius studied her, the intensity of his gaze making her heart beat faster. "Sometimes right and wrong are not enough. You must learn to read the shadows as well as the light, and you have begun to understand that." For a moment, silence fell between them, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. There was a tension that neither acknowledged, a pull that neither could fully name. It was not yet love, but it was the first trace of something deeper, a connection forged in danger, in understanding, and in shared burden. The next morning, a messenger arrived with urgent news. A distant enemy had advanced more quickly than expected, and the northern villages were in peril. Alara saw the maps, the reports, and the signs of strategy. Her mind raced. She understood the stakes better than anyone, not because she had been trained, but because she had learned to observe, to anticipate, and to think in the way Valerius did. She presented her plan carefully, outlining the defenses, the strategies, and the traps. Valerius listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he finally spoke. "Impressive," he said. "Few would have thought so clearly under pressure. You have potential, Alara, more than I expected." Alara felt a thrill, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. Potential was dangerous. It drew attention, envy, and risk. And yet, she could not deny the satisfaction of being recognized by the king, the man whose presence dominated her every thought. That evening, as she prepared for rest, she found herself wandering the corridors again, drawn by the quiet and the moonlight. She paused outside the throne room, and to her surprise, Valerius was there, pacing slowly. "You are awake," he said without turning. "I wondered if you would come here tonight." "I could not sleep," she admitted. "I think too much." He finally turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Thinking is dangerous here, but it is also necessary. Perhaps that is why I have watched you so closely. You do not simply obey, you understand." Alara stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "I only wish to survive and to understand you, my lord." Valerius's gaze held hers, intense and unreadable. "Understanding me may be more dangerous than you realize." A long silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. And then he said, almost quietly, "Yet I find that I am curious about your mind, your spirit, and perhaps even your courage." Alara's heart raced. Curiosity from Valerius was unlike any attention she had ever received. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and unsettling all at once. "You intrigue me," he continued, his voice low, carrying across the marble floors. "And intrigue can be deadly." Alara swallowed, her pulse quickening. She felt both alarm and fascination, a dangerous mix that left her breathless. She realized that the path ahead would be filled with challenge, with danger, and with emotions she had not yet named. The castle of Drevengr trembled with tension as the first light of dawn began to spill across the cliffs. Alara's heart pounded as she ran through the corridors, guided by instinct and fear. The throne room, once a place of cold command and silence, now lay open before her. The polished floor reflected the pale light of morning, and at its center lay the dagger, blackened with faint streaks of crimson. Valerius was gone. Panic surged through Alara's veins, but she forced herself to think. She had learned courage and clarity in this castle, and now, more than ever, she needed them. The threat that had been whispered in shadows, the conspiracies of nobles, had become real. Every moment counted, and failure could mean the loss of everything: Valerius, the castle, and even her own life. She knelt, inspecting the floor for clues. The dagger bore a sigil she recognized, the mark of a rival noble family, one whose envy and greed had been whispered about for months. They had struck when the king was vulnerable, hoping to overthrow him quietly, leaving chaos in their wake. Alara's mind raced. This was no longer a test of obedience or intelligence. It was a test of courage, loyalty, and action. Her heart told her what her mind confirmed. She would not allow the castle, or the man who had come to command her fascination and respect, to fall into enemy hands. Moving quickly but silently, she followed signs through the hidden corridors, noting where shadows moved unnaturally and which doors were unlocked or forced. The castle, in its grandeur and darkness, seemed alive, guiding her steps, whispering secrets only someone who had learned its rhythm could hear. She reached the northern tower, the highest point overlooking the cliffs and the distant forests. There, she found Valerius. He was alive, though grim and tense, his cloak torn slightly, his dark eyes sharper than ever. "Alara," he said, his voice low but steady. "This was more dangerous than I expected." "I saw the dagger," she replied, steadying her own racing heart. "The conspirators sought to kill or capture you. I came as quickly as I could." Valerius's gaze softened ever so slightly. "You have courage and judgment. Both are rarer than loyalty. You have surprised me." Alara felt a swell of relief and pride, but also something more, a connection she could not yet name, forged in shadow, challenge, and survival. "There is little time," Valerius said, turning to the narrow staircase leading to the battlements. "We must act carefully but decisively. They think the king is weak, distracted, vulnerable. They will regret that." Alara followed, her heart steady despite the danger. Together they moved through the castle, a silent force of intellect, strategy, and courage. Valerius led the way with his usual command, but Alara's sharp insight guided them past traps, hidden passages, and guards who had been bribed or deceived. As they approached the great hall, the conspirators revealed themselves, a group of nobles who had thought the king's absence meant opportunity. Their faces twisted with fear and anger as Valerius and Alara appeared, side by side. "You should have stayed in your shadows," Valerius said, his voice like steel. "Now you will face the consequences." Alara felt a surge of resolve. This was not only a moment to protect the king, but a moment to prove herself, not as a pawn or prisoner, but as an ally, an equal, a force that could match his strength in wit and courage. The confrontation was tense but precise. Valerius' authority was absolute, but Alara's insight made it flawless. She anticipated their moves, read their intentions, and guided the king to strategic positions. The nobles faltered, confused by her unexpected foresight, and their plot unraveled before it could come to fruition. When it was over, the great hall was silent except for their breathing. Valerius looked at Alara with something he rarely allowed, pure acknowledgement. "You did well," he said, voice softer now, yet filled with power. "You saved not only me but the castle and perhaps the kingdom itself." Alara bowed her head, overwhelmed by relief, pride, and a strange, new feeling she could not yet name. "I only did what I had to, my lord." "What anyone loyal would have done." Valerius stepped closer, the intensity of his gaze nearly suffocating. "No, not anyone. You are exceptional, and you have changed something in me I thought long dead." Alara's chest tightened. She felt the weight of the words, the acknowledgement, the recognition, not just of her actions, but of her presence, her courage, and her spirit. "Valerius," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He took her hand, a gesture that startled her but felt neither possessive nor controlling. "Alara," he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion, "you were given to me as punishment, and yet you have become my partner, my equal, my everything." The storm of fear, uncertainty, and intrigue that had filled the castle for weeks seemed to settle. The air was calm now, filled with a quiet triumph. Together, they had faced danger, betrayal, and uncertainty, and emerged stronger, wiser, and united. Over the following days, life in the castle returned to its rhythm, but it was changed forever. The conspirators had been removed, the court stabilized, and Valerius had begun to show more of himself than ever before. He allowed small moments of connection, gestures of trust, and even quiet conversations with Alara, sharing memories of the past, fears for the future, and glimpses of the man behind the king's shadow. Alara, in turn, found her own strength solidified. She was no longer merely a pawn or survivor. She was a partner, a strategist, and a presence the king could rely on. She had endured fear, danger, and intrigue and emerged transformed, her mind sharper, her heart stronger, and her spirit unyielding. One evening, as the sun set over the cliffs, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, Valerius led Alara to the highest tower. The wind tugged at their cloaks, the castle stretching out beneath them like a kingdom of shadows and light. "You have changed me," Valerius said softly, his dark eyes holding hers. "I thought I could never trust again, never care, never let another in. And yet, you have shown me that strength can exist alongside compassion, and that loyalty can exist alongside curiosity. You have taught me more than I expected." Alara's heart swelled with emotion. "And you have taught me too," she said, "about courage, about strategy, and about myself. I would not be here without you." For a long moment they simply stood together, the wind whipping around them, the sky burning with twilight. It was not a declaration of romance in the way some might expect. It was deeper, richer, forged in fire, shadow, and shared triumph. They understood each other, trusted each other, and were bound by more than circumstance. They were bound by choice, by survival, and by mutual respect. Finally, Valerius took a step closer. "Alara," he whispered, "you were given to me as punishment, yet you have become my everything, and I would not trade what we have for anything in this world." Tears glistened in Alara's eyes, but they were tears of relief, joy, and fulfillment. "Neither would I," she replied. The castle, which had once been a place of fear and power, now felt alive with hope and potential. Shadows still lingered in hidden corners, and challenges would always remain. But for the first time, the king and his partner, Alara, stood together, unshaken, unafraid, and ready to face whatever came next. The kingdom of Drevengr, once ruled by fear, now had a new kind of strength, one born of courage, understanding, and the bonds that could only be forged in the fires of challenge and trust. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and shadow, Alara and Valerius stood together at the highest tower. Side by side, they faced the future, not as ruler and pawn, but as equals, partners, and hearts united by everything they had endured. The storm had passed. The castle had endured. And in the quiet strength of their connection, something far greater had been born, a love forged in shadows, tempered by trials, and destined to become everything.